Hello, and welcome to the PsycHoe podcast, where we uncover alternative styles of relationships and different ways to approach therapy through alternative modalities. I am your host, Margot Underwood, and I want to remind everyone that I do this based off of donations. If you would like to donate, please send to the Venmo, the PsycHoe podcast. All right, let's jump into it. Today, we're joined by Nicholas Maio, who has what I like to call alphabet soup after his name. He has a master's in psychology, he's a board certified behavior analyst, he's a certified sex therapist, and he's currently working on his master's in marriage and family therapy with an LGBTQIA plus family system certification. He also operates a private telehealth practice called Empowered, a Center for Human Sexuality, where he provides dating advice for people on the spectrum. He does sexual behavior analyses and consultations. He provides sex therapy and even in-home parties. So let's welcome Nicholas. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nicholas. How are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you. How are you? Thank you for having me, by the way.
I'm good. The coffee feels good.
Oh, yeah, that's always a good thing.
So I wanted to start off with a little bit you introducing yourself, kind of your background, what brought you to this place and time right now.
Sure. So I uh, got started in sexuality education long before I got started in applied behavior analysis. I started sexuality education in 2003. Um, I was trained by the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, GLSEN. Um, did 36-hour training and then started providing sex ed to other high schoolers around Alaska and Hawaii. Opened up GSAs, Gay Straight Alliances, throughout those states. And then I went into college, and it was just kind of one of those things of like, what do you do to pay for college? So I started working at an adult store. It just made sense. I had the sex ed background. While I was there, started recognizing that like people were kind of using me as their as their therapist a little bit, coming in asking for a lot of advice, sharing a lot more than maybe you would expect people to share. And so it got me interested in psychology. Got my master's in psych, and then I did my first placement uh, in a disability services, specifically working with applied behavior analysis. And when I was at that first placement, just really recognized that there was a lot of things being done wrong or being done unethically, sometimes illegally, in the name of applied behavior analysis. And I, at first, was just like, this ABA thing is horrible. I don't want to be involved in this ABA thing. But then I started recognizing that in order to create change, you sometimes have to get into a system. And so I decided I was going to generate that change. Went to a different site, completed a practicum there, and while I was there, told them my background. And so even while I was in practicum, I was allowed to focus somewhat on sexuality and sexual behavior. Got to do that for another couple of years after getting my actual board certificate. And then started my own company, Empowered, where I could focus completely on sexuality and sexual behavior, behaviors related towards gender, and behaviors that have been shaped by constructs like normativity, trying to help people break away from those things and assisting everything from individuals who just want help to people who are court mandated because of committing sexual offenses, to working with couples. So I'm doing a lot of different work.
Really cool. And how long have you been doing Empowered?
We, gosh, wow, it's 2021. So we are just wrapping up our 5th year.
Okay, congratulations.
Thank you.
um, So, what exactly okay, you said you work with all different kinds of populations, but what is your primary focus?
Oh my goodness. I'm a jack of all trades. Primary focus, I would say right now is more on systemic level trainings of people who are making decisions or are directly behavior analysts for people with intellectual disabilities and autism. Doing a lot of that. And then in my direct client work, working a lot with different people who have intersections between uh, sexual minority status, kink identities, and or disabilities. So some of
Cool.
my people have neurotypical standing, but still offer them the same level of assistance and care that I would give anybody else.
Right. What originally brought you or interested you in working with these populations with
Oh,
disabled and kink and
right. So, because those are not always seen as two similar populations,
right.
but they actually intersect quite a bit. Um, so, in terms of kink, I've always been interested. I think that's a very interesting field, and more kink is being looked at in terms of its mental health components, and so it's just a very interesting area. Always looking at what can cause a client to not need therapy, right? We should not be career therapists. We shouldn't be looking at trying to get a client in and having them in forever. Um,
Right.
the goal of therapy should always be to get the client to be able to succeed on their own, so that they don't need therapy forever. So
Mm.
it's great when your client likes you, but at the same time, we got to be looking at trying to get this client out and on their own. So in regard to that, just really kind of looking at building up these kind of outside skills for people with the disabilities, and giving them this sort of not just a skill set, but also looking at opportunity and making sure that
Hmm.
they have opportunities to enact on those skill sets. I got really interested in disability because I was around it and I was seeing how people who had kinks were being looked at as people with problem behavior. Um,
Mm.
People who had identities that were not normative being looked at as being problematic. Um, Looking at even just standardized assessments. You look at the VB map, the ABLES, the AFLs, a lot of it is gendered. There are different norms in there, sometimes even different scores. You score a boy differently than you score a girl on different responses. Um,
Wow.
and so just looking at like these different standards, very
Mm.
interesting and always based, if you look at the research, you're looking at heterosexual, white, upper middle class to upper class. So
Hmm.
how valid is that research for the majority of the clients we're actually serving?
Right. Uh, so, can you just define what ABA is for the listeners who don't know what applied behavior analysis focuses on?
Of course. So applied behavior analysis is its own very kind of separate subfield within psychology. There's a whole thing of like we're behavior analysts, we're not psychologists, but
Ooh.
it's it's more of a something I want to note is that behavior analysis is a very limited scope of practice in and of itself. But behavior analysts can have additional scopes on top of that. So behavior analysis is purely behavioral health. It's not seen as mental health, even though it falls under the mental health umbrella. Um, so in behavior analysis, there's no actual training in psychotherapy. There's no training in systems and in a lot of the different things that traditional therapists learn about. In behavior analysis, we focus very strictly on the principles of behavior and the seven dimensions of ABA. Get a cab. So everything's got to be generalizable, effective, technological, applied. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's got to be conceptually systematic. Everything has to be analyzed. Obviously, we're behavior analysts, and everything has to be behavioral. So if it fits those 7 dimensions, and you're sticking with the pillars of ABA, you're making sure that things are parsimonious or simple, that everything is being very much backed, so that it is going to be very effective for this individual. You're really you're doing applied behavior analysis when you are making sure to adhere to those things. You're doing graphic displays of data. You're checking in and making sure that the client's progress is not just the client saying they feel better, but also tangible evidence that the client is doing
Mm-hmm.
better. Um,
Yeah.
I think sometimes in ABA we forget to check in on the feel side. Sometimes we just
Uh,
look at the data. So
uh,
it's important to make sure that we get both.
yeah. Uh, so ABA and sex therapy, like they're both focused on behavior,
Mhm.
right? I mean, can you explain what sex therapy is and how that would like integrate into your ABA practice?
So something I want to note is that I do have to keep the two very separate. The BACB
Mm-hmm.
in 2016 did issue a statement that says that behavior analysts are not sex therapists, and you're not allowed to practice sex therapy under a behavior analyst credential. So we want to make absolutely sure to really separate the two.
Mm-hmm.
So there are behavioral sides to sex therapy, and some of those behavioral elements can be worked into an ABA framework. But when I do that, I call that sexual behavior analysis, not sex
Mm-hmm.
therapy. So things like doing genograms and looking at delving into family of origin and working with the different people in the system and all of these different things that I can do in sex therapy. Not really going to do that as much in sexual ABA. Um, so when I'm doing ABA, I still want to have that systemic approach and look at the different people in the system who can reinforce or punish the behaviors so that we can have shaping, we can have extinction, and we can have something else reinforced in its place. Um, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going in and being like, "Hey, so let's talk about where this feeling might have come from and how it trickled down through your family, and those kinds of things." Also, some of the things that I do in sex therapy can get more didactic, and we're not requiring like direct responding or application in the moment. We check in sex therapy to see how they're applying and generalizing, but we also aren't there physically to watch them have their sex. So
Mm-hmm.
there's no like behavioral observation. Uh, so there's definitely some differences between the two, but things like Sensate focus, which is a common behavioral practice within sex therapy, um, taking that, making it a little bit more technological, and conceptually systematic, and starting to work that into an ABA framework is something that I'm looking at,
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out how I can work that a little better. And then I do a lot of in my sexual ABA, a lot of ACT training, that's specific to addressing sexual impulse or sexual anxiety.
Okay. Okay. So for neurotypical people who come to you for sex therapy, why would why would someone even reach out for sex therapy in the first place, really?
Okay, yeah. So tightening or clamping vaginal muscles or anal muscles when attempting
Mm-hmm.
penetration, um, having various touch related trauma responses. I've got, even in my sex therapy, sometimes I'll take on a client with like autism who has sensory issues. And
Mm-hmm.
so just kind of noting like that we can address that on the therapy side, not always just the ABA side. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but getting in there. Also working with a lot of penile related anxiety, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So delayed ejaculation, uh, inability to get or maintain an erection. So we see a lot of that coming through in sex therapy. And then also trust issues. So
Mm-hmm.
like not being able to really let go and just be free in the bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there's also stigma and shame that we work through in sex therapy. And then definitely gender related. So helping individuals who are going through transition, or are just
Mm-hmm.
like trying to understand gender and sexual and orientation fluidity. And then also on my sex therapy side, working a lot with some of the heavier kinks.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear more about the kink side of things. Um, I'm sure that I would benefit from a therapist. Tell me if I'm right. They recently just took off sadomasochism or just sadism from the DSM-5, like mental health
Yes.
diseases.
So paraphilias, paraphilic disorder, has been separated from just paraphilia. So
Okay.
paraphilias are fetishes and kinks. Um, Previously, all fetishes and kinks were seen as like this must have to do with some sort of trauma response, like there must have been something bad in your childhood, and that's why you're kinky now as an adult. And
Mm,
a lot of this comes back to like Freudian psychoanalytic, and then like combining that with some Ericksonian like learning theory and just all these different things. But if we look more at like where we're at currently, the idea is that really there's paraphilic disorder, and then people have their fetishes or their paraphilias, and the disorder
hmm
in the DSM, it comes down to, is it illegal? Does it involve children, animals, or rape? Because in those cases, we're probably worthy of an intervention. Um, but then also, is it causing you distress? Is it causing distress
hmm
like financially, emotionally, in other relationships in your life? And do you feel like you have no control over it, like you're compulsively driven to do it? And so
Right.
that's really where it starts to become disorder. But sadomasochism is not in there as something that can be diagnosed, because unless you feel like it's causing you distress and you have no control over it and you're stuck being
hmm
a masochist or a sadist, then you could potentially get assistance, but the assistance would be more for developing behavioral control and recognizing that, like, this doesn't have power over you if you don't give it power over you.
Right. That's cool. Um, so I want to now get into, well, first I want to hear about is something at least one accomplishment in the field that you're recognized for. I think the sexual behavior analyst would kind of be a part of that. Are you blazing that field right now?
So I did coin the term sexual behavior analysis. I've been calling it that since 2013. And that term is taking off. Like, for instance, right now, the first ever sex and
Hmm.
ABA conference will be happening in January. And right in the middle banner, it says sexual behavior analysis. And I was like, that's me. So that was exciting.
That's awesome.
Uh, I'm not the one who set up the conference. Actually, it's one of my former employees who works to set that up. But that's something that I would say has been pretty big. Is that, like, I started the first ever sexuality and ABA center
Right.
that had never been done, and so we did that with Empowered, and we've had practicum students come through Empowered and already owning their own practices or moving high up in other practices, and then people who have come through Empowered as employees who are now becoming consultants and subject matter experts in sexuality. So in a way, Empowered became kind of a very quickly a little hub for
Yeah.
sexual ABA.
I love that. Do people need to what kind of training do you need to be a sexual behavior analyst?
Oh, that's a great question. I give training specific to competency in sexual behavior analysis. So what we kind of came up with, so we hosted these internal conferences on sexual behavior analysis at Empowered, for sexual behavior analysts, meaning our staff and our practicum students. And then this year we were going to open it up and make it a national conference. And so one of my employees went ahead and did that with the Sex ABA conference.
Cool.
Um, So as we were doing these more mini versions of that, we were calling them align. And so the goal was to like align our practices and develop this as a subfield. And
Mm,
so we kind of came up with some minimum standards that we felt would be really important. And so looking at, the BACB ethical code, looking at the ethical code from ASECT, which is the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, and really getting an idea there of like, okay, so if that's the accrediting body of those fields, what are their minimum standards for those fields?
mm,
And let's combine those standards with what the BACB says about competency. So we did
mm-hmm,
that and really came up with the idea that you would have to have education, training, and supervision
mm,
in sexual behavior and sexuality. And you would have to have the minimum ASECT requirements, excuse me, which
mm,
are 90 clock hours of instruction in each of the core knowledge areas that ASECT has delineated. And there's quite a few of them.
mm.
Um, I want to say it's like A through like P or Q. There's a
Right.
lot of different core knowledge areas. So we'd want to make sure that we have all of that because in order to address sexuality, you want to be able to address it comprehensively and without bringing your values to the table.
Right.
Because we're supposed to be relying on scientific knowledge, not our personal values or faith. That's the Ethical Code 1.01, reliance
Mm,
on scientific knowledge.
mm-hmm. Are you the only person offering this kind of training?
No. So I'm one of the few. And then
Mm-hmm,
I'm offering it in a package that's different than anyone else's. But currently, my former employees are also offering this type of training as well. And
mm-hmm,
I think we're all kind of trying to figure out as like a growing field, kind of where each of our place will be in that. Um, the special interest group for ABAI for sexual behavior research and practice does have a list of different people who are competent in different areas of sexuality and who to reach out for different issues or populations.
okay.
So that's a pretty cool resource. The Sex ABA conference in January 30th, will also be having, I think at 6 p.m. that night, a panel discussion about consultants and supervision and who to consult and who to reach out to about different things. The bare minimum. I mean, you got to start teaching about feelings, empathy, basic social skills, using things like the peers curriculum to kind of get clients to where they need to be
Mm-hmm,
for just socializing. Um, but uh, we kind of then move up from there into some higher level things. So I teach, we have programs like how to build an online profile, recognizing trolls and catfishers and how to deal with them,
mm,
moving from online to in person. And so, uh, for these programs that we have, for instance, the online to in person, in order to have that program as one that you're going to be doing, you have to have already either met criteria for or completed the programs that we have on consent, boundaries. We make sure that they've had their program in flirting versus harassment, that they have these skills for really discerning all of these things and what to do if you accidentally violated consent or if you realize that you're harassing somebody. Um, so once we get
that's
to
really
this
cool.
point, and thank you. So once we get to this
Yeah.
point and they've got that knowledge, what I do is I utilize either practicum students. Sometimes I've utilized Empowered Zone office staff, and then there have been times where I've actually we needed variety, so I hired and HIPAA trained actors
Mm-hmm,
and actresses to come just run role plays. Um, and so we're doing behavioral rehearsals where I have all of these kind of targets. I have a general task analysis of like, is this person going up to these other people and waiting to get into the conversation, or is he just like plowing in? And like that kind of thing comes straight from peers. But then we get into this higher level. Is he noticing whenever the actress is giving subtle cues with her face that like she's not feeling great? Is he stopping when that subtle cue is given? How is he responding? So like we have all of these different targets, even in the behavioral rehearsals. And so the client engages in this attempt at flirting, and I'm there to pause if we need to, and I'll pause and say something along the lines of like, "Hey, pause, freeze, actress. Okay, let's take a look at her face right now. How do you think she feels? And then, why do you think she might feel that way? Okay, let's check in with her. Actress, how do you feel right now? Okay, is that why you were making that face? Did you know you were making that face?" Uh, and so then, once we're able to
So
kind of
funny. I feel
resolve
like,
that, oh, go ahead.
sorry, so many people could benefit from this. So many people are unaware of facial expressions, body language. And then there's also even people, like myself, who have a hard time even speaking up about it sometimes. It's like, how do you even not understand what's going on? Speaking
Yeah.
in neurotypical terms. But sorry, continue.
Oh no, you're fine. So what I was going to say is, it's a safe thing when you do it in a role play. They know that they're not actually going to get slapped. They know that they're not actually going to get kicked out of this
Right.
area or whatever for taking this chance and trying. So we get those responses, and then we can start shaping those responses until they can kind of navigate these social rules better. Um, and anytime, of course, that the flirting is going really well, we have to pause to a certain point and be like, okay, things are going very well right here. So since things are going very well, we're going to assume things kept going well. And let's go through, now it's the end of the date. How are you going to say goodbye to each other? Because I'm definitely not getting paid, nor am I paying an actress or actor to actually flirt and date with this client. So the other thing that I also look for is like, I don't want to use the same actor or actress over and over and over with a client. I want to make sure that they're able to generalize, and also that they don't start to blur the line between fantasy role play and what might be construed as a real relationship. Um, Once we get to this point, though, where they're responding really well with an actor or an actress, then we move out into the real world, actual locations where they might want to do this, and continue the work with an actor and actress until they're doing well in the natural environment. And then we move it a little differently. And so I'll do things like actually I'll have them go online. They're using this profile that we created in our online thing when we're doing our program. So they have this profile that's made. So once we get to this point where they have this profile, and again, they've also completed a catfishing and a trolling program, so I know that they can be safe in the event that somebody tries to catfish them. They're going to call it out. They're going to know. They're going to block this person or report this person. So we do it all from like A to Z. So they get online. The actor or the actress has messaged them, and so we start this whole thing where they do the online flirting. They're going through and they're making sure that they're not giving out more PPI than is warranted, and they're meeting in a safe place. And I'm checking to make sure, okay, now that you've set this up, are you contacting a friend or a guardian and letting them know where you're going to be, making sure that you have a ride to pick you up afterwards, things like that. And then once that's set up, drive them to the restaurant or the place that they're going, bar sometimes, different places that they would want to go to meet people. And of course, they've established that they're going to be meeting with this person. They have their picture. They know what that person's wearing. And so we get there, and I'm like, okay, you know what this person's face looks like. You know what they're wearing. Let's go see. Can you find them? Right? Like that's a
Yeah.
step.
Yeah, it
And
is.
so I'm there with them, but I hang out behind a bit. And I also tell them while we're in this environment, um, I am not going to tell anybody that I'm here as your therapist. Like, I'm just another
Mm-hmm.
guy. I'm here. So if you want me to sit like nearby, I'll sit nearby. If you want me to sit at your table, I'll sit at your table. But I'm not going to try and like make you have me around. So
Right.
give them a little bit more freedom. They find the actor or the actress. They sit down at the right table. If not, I'm there to help. But they sit down at the right table. They start engaging, and I can sit close enough to where I can see the actor or actress's facial responses and body language. Every now and then I can catch the language being used. Sometimes it's loud. I can't control that.
Yeah.
Different things if we're at a bar or something. But getting what data I can, and then checking in with the actor or the actress for anything that was missed. Like, did he share his name? Like,
Mm.
did he,
Right.
was there any point in time where he tried to get you to go into private? Did he stay out in public willingly, or did you have to
Mm-hmm.
prompt staying out in public? So checking
Mm-hmm.
those types of things. Going
Okay.
back, meeting with the client, giving them their feedback, and then doing this again as many times as is needed until I know that they're able to do this well and safely. And I'm not pushing like, that it's a first date, so you're not allowed to have sex. Like, I'm not saying that. I tell them, if it's a first date, don't expect sex. if
Mm-hmm.
uh, if it's a first encounter, it makes a lot more sense to expect sex. If like you're meeting for a hookup, but at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, you've also not met in person. So when you're meeting in person for the first time, they have the right to change their mind. You have your right to change your mind. So we also incorporate that into this whole thing. So we basically have two separate little task analyses that we're doing, and one is date, and one is what we call encounter or hookup. And
I
so it
love that.
looks a little bit different each time. Um, Once I know that they can do this safely, then I'm like, okay, let's remove the actors or actresses. I will still go out with you. I'm going to sit at the table nearest by, and I'm going to be there in case things get rough, and I can help pull you out of it. But I think you've got this. And
Mm-hmm.
so we go, and they start their flirting, and had a couple of really awesome successes. And I've also had a couple of times where I've had to get in there and save somebody. But I can't
Mm-hmm.
control the variables of other people. And something I want to note is that more and more people are choosing who they want to talk to or date before they go out. They're using these apps.
Mm-hmm.
So just going to a bar and trying to flirt is so much harder than even like 10, 15 years ago. We
Yeah.
used to go to a bar and like nobody was in their phones, everybody was talking, and people all wanted to meet new people, and that was a social thing. And now you go to a bar and people are hanging out in their phones and they're only talking to their friends, and they don't want to flirt with anybody because they already picked their match on Tinder and he's going to show up at 1
Mm.
a.m. They're holding out. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like it's a very different world that we're in, and that's a big part of why I'm teaching my clients to meet people online before they go out in person,
Mm-hmm.
because it's what neurotypical people are doing as well. um, and so if they're just going and trying to flirt in person, which is often what the funders want, the funders oftentimes, it's faster and easier and safer to just teach flirting in person than to incorporate all of these online elements. um,
Funders?
yes, the people paying insurance, Medicaid, agencies. So sometimes, they're looking at this idea of online, and they're like, "Can't you just teach the in person? Like, we
Yeah,
would feel
streamline
much
it.
better." And yeah, and they're what they're looking at though is they're looking at the safety elements. They're looking at things like catfishing and
Mm-hmm.
trolling, and these the ability for somebody to pretend that they're something that they're not, and come out being friendly, and then turn out to be like a crazy person.
Right.
And so this is like the idea in people's heads, but at the same time, the reality is that that can also happen in person. You can meet
It's
somebody at a bar
true.
who seems totally awesome.
100%.
I mean, we look at the concept of roofing, right? Roofing
Mm-hmm.
isn't happening online. So in a lot of different ways, the online aspect is really relevant, especially right now, and especially because more and more people are choosing who they want to talk to before they go out. And so if
Mm-hmm.
you try and talk, it's crazy because you're teaching social skills, you're teaching these people how to have great conversations, and they're doing everything right, but they're punished because they're being social in a social environment. where other people are
Right.
not expecting socialization.
Oh, that's so
Because bars
weird.
are no longer for socializing with new people; they're for hanging out with your friends over drinks, which you used to do at home. Like it's this interesting kind of thing, and I think that
Yeah.
it's not better or worse, but it's very different. And so we just have to be preparing clients for the way that trends are showing us dating is going to look versus what we were good at doing before smartphones.
Oh yeah.
Like that's something to just recognize there.
Yeah, definitely. I prefer talking to someone before I meet them. I'm super like I have a really busy schedule. I don't just and even talking to someone too, like if they don't have a good profile, I'm like, meh, you didn't put enough work in. I'm not like interested. And it puts a lot of filters in place for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I'm definitely a fan. I'm on all the alternative dating sites. Do you ever get some neurotypical people who want to go through this like dating process?
Honestly, I have not had a neurotypical person sign up for that program. That's been so far. I want to say everybody that we've done that one with has had autism. Trying to think if any of them had a different disability that went through that particular program. At this point, I want to say probably just our clients with autism who've done that program. I've done a
Hmm.
lot of programs for clients with Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, things like that, but never that particular set of programs. And I think part of that too comes down to um, how easy it is to mingle when you have no phenotypical signs of your disability versus when you do. I
True.
think that's an element there. For some people, like for instance, adults with Down syndrome, they might not even have ever considered the possibility that they could date a neurotypical person, and their
Right.
environments might not have ever supported that idea, even if they've had it. Um, for instance, I knew a young man who he's only attracted to neurotypical women, women with no disability that is discernible, and he has Down syndrome, and so the emphasis that most people were making was like help him love himself more and be more okay with Down syndrome so that he'll be okay with dating girls with Down syndrome. And it
Hmm.
was like, or instead of telling him what is or isn't hot, let
Hmm.
him kind of he's into NT girls, right?
Yeah.
That's his kink. So if that's what he wants, then let's maybe set him up and start building him towards that.
Yeah.
If that's a possibility for him, and so we
Yeah.
always want to have those kinds of conversations at least, and
Yeah.
we always want to look at community access and least restrictive things always.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. It's silly to try and just tell someone who they should like, or I mean, that's even telling someone that they're not even good enough, and that's not ethical in my.
Well, if we look at the disability treatments in general and agency standards across the U.S. over the last 100 years, it's shifted immensely. We used to put anybody with a notable disability, we'd lock them up, we'd put them away.
Mm-hmm.
That was the thing. You just lock them up and put away the key. Medicate them so that they don't have sexual impulse.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people who had really high sexual impulse were being used in studies that they had no say in, and just all these really intense things used to happen in the disability world. And I think that we sometimes forget that that wasn't really that long ago.
Right.
And so yeah, there's so much work to still be done, but we're on a good path. A lot of work still to be done. A lot of
Yeah.
infantilization still happening and treating them like they're younger or not
Mm.
sexual. But like we're getting more and more into treating them like humans, and more with that comes the sex side because sexuality is intrinsically linked to being human. Even if you're asexual, it's still tied
Absolutely.
to being human.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have an asexual friend who she doesn't she's a pro dom and she told me she doesn't get anything from it, but she
She gets
still
money.
needs that release. Well, yes, she gets money, and it's still just a release for her. She doesn't find it like she's not getting wet or she's not turned on by this situation, but it's still a good sexual release for her. Um,
Yeah.
I found that really interesting.
Something to note about asexuality is that classical definition means that you're not attracted to the idea of sex. That's asexual, and so uh, that doesn't mean that they don't ever want sex. They might
Right.
sometimes, or they might want a variant of it or get something else out of it. But like, if you were just to be like, "Hey, you want to have sex?" The average asexual person's going to be like, "No, that's not
Yeah.
really. Nah, probably not." Uh,
Oh my gosh. Sometimes I feel that way for sure. I'm just like, can we just do something else? Like, because a lot of people don't understand that sex doesn't have to be penile vaginal penetration. It can be so many other things,
oh
just
yeah.
like, and that's something that I really want to bring to light for people, like just soft touch or even just having a conversation with someone.
Hmm.
um, you still develop that form of connection with them, which is really the core, I think, of having sex.
Oh yeah, and that's a big reason why I'm such an emphasizing advocate for Sensate focus. Like I'm huge on it because Sensate focus is learning to focus completely on the senses and on the
Mm-hmm.
connection that you have with your partner, and to let go of any other thoughts or feelings that you're having that are not related to this intimacy,
Mm-hmm.
and recognizing if you're having anxiety about this intimacy. That anxiety is actually related to thoughts about the past or the future. It's not part of the present. So you can let go of the anxieties and just really focus on the sensory aspect. And then people move away from that classical vaginal penis
Mm-hmm.
penetration heteronormative kind of idea of what sex is. Um, and they start to generate their own definition of sex. And that's one thing I love doing is towards the end of Sensate Focus,
Mm-hmm.
asking the couple, I always ask them at the beginning to define sex, and I always ask them near the end to define sex. And then I have a conversation with them about how it's shifted and changed and like how these behavioral protocols shaped their language too, and how their
That's
language
interesting.
reinforced, because you're thinking your language, it's reinforcing what the behavioral protocols were doing. And so we now have created a system that's reinforcing itself. And the couple together are also doing that, reinforcing one another and themselves as they engage in these exercises.
So, what is like a typical beginning sex definition versus something that you would aim for after
Yeah.
the
Very common baseline sex definition is sex. Sex, even for people who are like, they know what's coming, so they know to avoid. I think people know when they get asked
It's
this
a trick
question.
question.
They do. They're like, oh, the sex therapist just asked me to define sex. So uh, they'll oftentimes say something along the lines of like, I know it shouldn't have to be this, but this
Mm,
is what I think of, which still tells me that underlying this is your definition of sex. uh,
right.
Penis to vagina and an orgasm, almost always penis to vagina and an orgasm. That's what people are thinking about. And so if if we take that and over time can shape that and look at this definition being, what is sex? Well, sex is whatever me and my partner do when we're journeying together,
Mm.
sometimes naked.
I
Like
like that. Sometimes naked.
uh,
Oh.
I really love this more open, flexible idea that sex is a journey that two
Hmm.
people go on, and you have no set goal. You have no Your only goal is to journey together.
Yeah.
And so when you go into it, and I also teach my clients to tap into their inner child. Um, and obviously, I want to keep kids separate from sex, but your
Of
inner
course.
child, we all have this
Right.
inner child.
Well, you have to
Uh,
define the different psyches, right?
right? So without getting too into it, because I know behavior analysts aren't going to want to hear all of that, but
Mm,
we all have this inner child. And this inner child, this part of us that's spontaneous, that's free, that wants to have a good time, that's impulsive, um, this part of us can be really hindering, or it can be highlighted as a strength. And
mhm,
so if we can let that inner kid out during
mhm,
sex,
mhm,
and us and our
mm,
partners just making sex into whatever it can be because we're curiously observing and exploring. That's all it
yeah.
is. Like, I don't know where this is going to go today, but I'm here with you, and that's what matters. And let's turn the bed into a playground. And I don't know,
Yeah.
by the end of tonight, we might have an orgasm, or we might not. Doesn't matter because I was with you.
Yeah.
And that's really the important part there. So I've done things like actually had clients. This is one of my favorites. If they're hyperfixating on erections, having them take an extra session in between some of their sensate, and literally the entire goal is anytime you get an erection, you're going to let it go away
Mhm.
every time, because they're afraid of their erections going away, right? That's the anxiety.
Mm,
So I'm
okay.
like, you know what we're going to do is your partner's going to tantalize you every time your partner tantalizes you and you do get an erection. You're going to let it go away, and your
Mhm.
partner's going to let it go away. And then once it's gone, you can resume. And you're
Mhm.
only going to move forward with intimacy without an erection. You're not allowed to have an erection in your intimacy this week.
That's cool. That kind of reminds me of this. I don't remember what I was reading, but it was talking about how a man should enter a woman. Like, I mean, this is not to say this is like a rule, but enter a woman like softer and like leave them harder. Like they shouldn't go in hard and leave soft. They should enter soft and leave hard. Um, because orgasm and erections are not the center focus there. It
That's
kind of
interesting. I've
reminded
never
me.
heard it phrased that way.
Yeah, it was I want to say it was a Buddhist like approach or something, but it definitely our tantric approach. But yeah, it was interesting focusing on like the female pleasure side of things.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so I want to see about. Okay, so you're gonna think this is awesome.
Oh,
This
yeah,
do
the
you write
psychology of
it?
Zelda.
Okay, so you posted this, and I'm a huge Zelda fan, and I was like, oh my god. So I know that you're a little bit of a nerd when it comes to gaming, and you incorporate it into your practice. Um, by the way, did you read the book?
I'm actually, so I bought that one and Psychology of Final Fantasy at the same time, and I'm still working through Psychology of Final Fantasy. I'm so looking
Okay.
forward to Psychology of Zelda.
um, you have a D&D game that you play with your clients.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So it's currently on a hiatus. We're revamping and we're making it more behavior analytic, um, getting some data tracking in place and stuff like that. I have a practicum student right now who's overhauling it. Um, so the first time that we ran this group, it was more of a like let's see where this goes.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not here to prove a hypothesis. I'm here to generate some hypotheses at first. And so we didn't
Right.
charge any money, and we told people, up front, like this is not behavior analytic in nature. This is to give you a chance to learn sex ed in a very different way and to practice social skills in a very different way. Um, and so we were utilizing research. This wasn't something we came up with on our own, but uh, we what we did was we generated, and I had the help of Elise Keel. I'm going to give her a full shout out because what she did was amazing. So she's not a behavior analyst. She is an autistic self advocate, and She's done some really amazing volunteer work at Empowered. And one of the things that she did was helped us with this group because she's very, very good at D&D. And so she helped. I sat down with her. I told her, I said, these are 7 lessons I want to make sure get learned. I want my clients to know about consent. I want them to know about gender. I want them to know about sexual fluidity. I want them to know about catfishing and trolls. I want them to know about why we can't assume the thoughts or feelings of another person, and why gender stereotypes should not be like what we act upon. We can have them, but like we shouldn't just assume that because she's a woman she's going to want this, or because I'm a guy I
Mm-hmm.
have to do this. And so Elise took these lessons that I had and all of these points that I wanted to make, and it was just so cool of her. She wrote out a campaign where every session was one of these different lessons. And so
Cool.
we would sit down as a group, and I would always play as one of the characters, so that I was in the world and could provide some friendly guidance and prompting within the game, so that we didn't have to pause things and we didn't have to stop and
Mm.
provide feedback and then re-enter. So my character was there, and then I also even had a side character of my own, because my character was intentionally chaotic neutral, which means that half of the time my character was giving really good advice, but half the time my character was giving very bad advice, with the goal of creating chaos and just
Yeah, of
enjoying it.
course.
So he had his own side character that was his magical pet that was hanging out, and the side character was a good character,
Mm-hmm.
and so this character would pop up every now and then and be like the extra conscience for the group,
Yeah,
especially if they started taking my bad advice. So it's just
it's
kind of coming in with
interesting.
that extra level of prompting and being like, "Are we sure we want to be listening to the chaotic neutral person right now?" Because like, oh, I don't know, I don't know. And then letting the group kind of figure out why is this little otter? It was my little otter named Fluffer Notter. So my little otter speaking up. If my little otter's speaking up, something's up. Like
Mm-hmm.
they know to have a conversation. And
Mm.
getting to watch them in character, which was also really cool. Don these roles, try to empathize with each other, with each other's characters, with their character and how their character would be responding to things versus how they might.
Mm.
It's just creating a lot of higher level empathy, teamwork, team building, cooperation, strategizing, just very higher level social skills that I knew all of these participants. I had worked with them prior, and I had never seen them use their social skills this way. Um, and
Cool.
they were getting this sex ed, and learning these additional lessons on top of that. And so we want to now go back through, and now that we've seen that it can work, and we've seen how awesome it really is, we're going through and creating a data collection system and a basic like pre and post assessment,
Cool.
so that we can start to offer that. And so we're calling it sex ed, and then the D on sex ed turns into a D&D symbol, so sex ed D&D.
Love it. And this is something you do remotely with people, obviously, because you're online playing the actual video game.
So it's not a video game. Dungeons and Dragons is a tabletop RPG. So prior to the pandemic, they were coming to my office after hours, and we were hosting it in our conference room.
Okay. Okay. Um. Oh, I wanted to hear about what it looks like when one of your autistic clients wants to know about kink and um, I mean the most, I guess, most extreme example I can come up with is impact play. If that's something, if something kind of edge play that they wanted to engage in, like how do you approach that with your clients, and is that common with your clients?
So I will throw out there that I have not had clients come in directly and ask about impact play. I know about impact play.
Mm-hmm.
very much so. But uh, in regard to clients coming in and asking for assistance with that, or having needs that I felt could be met through that, that has
Mm-hmm.
not yet happened in my own practice. But some of the kinks that have come through that have been very interesting, I'll throw out there that probably the most interesting for people working with disabilities comes down to ABDL, adult babies and diaper
Mm-hmm.
lovers. So, like, if you're working with care staff in a residential facility and you're the behavior analyst and you're trying to provide wraparound care and train everybody and make sure everybody's taken care of with the client at the center. But the client's kink is being taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
You really have to walk some lines here
I
because
bet.
literally worked into your job at this point is satisfying this person's kink. But
Yeah.
also, what you're not allowed to do in your job is satisfy this person's kink. So,
It's really
so
interesting.
yeah, when we have that issue come up, the issue is not with the client because there's nothing wrong with being ABDL. The
Yeah.
issue comes down to the system not being prepared for
Yeah.
things like ABDL identities.
Yeah.
So I've been working with staff very much on like research has indicated that these are the mental health reasons why somebody might engage in ABDL. Um, Research has indicated these are the sexual reasons why somebody might engage in ABDL. Um, Research has linked the diapers to both the coping and the sexual side. So you've got
Mm-hmm.
to get in there and you've got to find out the function of the diapers for the client. Are they in there for the coping? Are they in there for the sex? Are they in there for both? If it's purely for coping, um, then I don't see any reason why a client couldn't even be prompted by staff like, hey, seems like you could use some time. Would you want to like watch Barney? Would you want to
Mm-hmm.
color or would you want to go put on a diaper and then maybe pick out an activity? Like
Mm-hmm.
to me, that's totally fine.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, staff are like given this directive that they're supposed to be helping the client be independent and age appropriate. And like, again, the idea that they would be offering childlike options.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard for some staff and also hard, again, when we look at funders, the people who are paying
Mm-hmm.
for the service, they don't want to see that that a client who's supposed to be per their mandates, the client's supposed to be getting more and more independent, and then they're seeing that this client is spending money on childlike things, and staff are getting
Mm-hmm.
childlike prompts. So they look at that and they say, "Hey, this is the opposite," and so having to work up the system and really
Mm-hmm.
showing throughout the system, like this is the mental health side. This is the sexual side. Staff can be involved in this. Staff cannot be involved in that. Um, Almost never would I recommend staff be involved in the changing of a diaper for an ABDL,
Mm-hmm.
unless the person actually has to wear diapers because they have physical reasons or intellectual reasons why they cannot wipe themselves or take care of themselves. That's one thing. But like if they don't have actual care needs related to the diaper, and it's more of a coping or a sexual, uh, then they can change it. And if they want somebody else to change that diaper, it's not going to be staff, but maybe now is a good time for them to start working on being a good choice for a partner and on getting community access and joining the ABDL community. But then also, that means that you have to train staff on how to help the client access the ABDL community and how to do
Mm-hmm.
that without overstepping bounds. So there's like all of these
So interesting.
fun extra layers. And
Yeah.
definitely very, very relevant in the work that a lot of behavior analysts do as ABDL comes more and more out of the closet and is being more and more of a recognized kink.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like ABA, everyone in ABA should be trained in a sexual, should have some type of training when it comes to sexuality because it's inevitably going to come up in their practice. It is. Unless someone is, I mean, it's still going to come up if someone is asexual, because they're gonna ask like, well, why am I not normal? And then have to
Or the
work through
system
that.
might tell them that they're not. They might have
Exactly.
staff who are prompting them to try and date. They might have family members who are telling them that, they need to date. A lot of these things happen.
Right.
And also the assumption that like asexual is like a solid identity and not a spectrum, is
Right.
something to really acknowledge there too, is that there are asexuals who absolutely will never in their lives touch genitals. Like, ew, those are gross. I'm not doing it. And then you've
Yeah.
got asexuals who are like, I'll play with genitals. I don't see it as a sexual thing, but they're pretty funny. Like,
Right.
can I do puppetry with your penis? And then you've got like asexuals who are like, I'm not really into genitals at all, but like, I love the fact that other people like to have sex. And so,
Hmm.
I'm cool with like hosting a sex party and I'll just be the person who hosts.
Yeah.
So there's some very sex positive asexual people out there.
Yeah.
It's a very unique identity in itself because it's a whole spectrum of identities with only one label.
Yeah. True. Like so many things.
Yeah, like so many things. But then when we try and label things individually, like when we look at the queer umbrella being labeled as LGBTQIA plus, and some people go and they do all of the acronyms. Um,
Yeah.
there's validity in that. Like, it's important that everybody be recognized. At the same time,
Absolutely.
we have to look at the reality of human behavior and at the fact that like reading a really long acronym when sometimes you don't even know what all of the letters means is probably punitive. And so giving this really long acronym every single time might cause other people to shut down a little bit. So like we got to work with these competing contingencies here because we want to make sure that everyone is highlighted. And the purpose of
Hmm.
this is so that everyone is highlighted. But if it causes the people that we're trying to reach out to for support or help to shut down, then is anyone highlighted? And
Right.
so do we go back to just calling it the queer umbrella and calling anybody with this identity queer, regardless of where you're at on the LGBTQIA plus spectrum, or do we say
Right.
LGBTQIA plus? And you can always
Hmm.
tell how comfortable a person is doing this work by how well they can rattle off that acronym. You can just tell if somebody's been doing this work with the LGBTQIA plus population because that rolls off their tongue. And then you get the other
Right.
people who are like, the GLBs and the T's. I think wasn't there? Is there a P in there somewhere? And you're like, okay, I don't think that you've been doing this
Oh my
very much.
gosh. Yeah, it's true.
Uh,
I when it comes to when it comes to labels, I'm so anti-label sometimes because I'm so about labels, but I'm so anti-label at the same time because I feel like it's so limiting. And a lot of people, when you can put a label to something, there's usually one definition that they know. And it's also a way for someone to say, okay, this is what you are. Now I understand you and I can put you in this box and,
but then you've put
deal with
somebody in a
with you.
box, and you're assuming that you can understand, and that's the
Right.
hardest part. And sometimes it happens even with people who have the same label. Um,
Yeah,
so
the hierarchies yeah.
and not recognizing the intersections.
Mm,
One of the things that has been really highlighted in the queer community recently is uh, white cisgender gay men claiming that we're closer to equality and we've got all these rights, and then you look at the rest of the queer umbrella, and they're not closer in a
mm-mm.
lot of ways, and so we see again when we label ourselves as one community, people forget about these different subsets having different experiences, and so we want to make sure that all of these subsects are being highlighted. So it's a weird thing. Labels are interesting. Have you done any looking into relational frame theory?
No.
I really
No.
recommend you look into RFT. Relational frame theory is being more and more accepted in ABA. It's the foundation of ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy.
Mm-hmm.
which can be used in ABA through ACT training, or it can be used outside of ABA as ACT therapy, which is more psychodynamic and
Okay.
psychotherapeutic than the ACT training, which is more like, here's the skill, here's how to apply it, let's go. And
Yeah.
I like both. Both are pretty amazingly effective. I will say I like the freedom of ACT therapy and getting in there deep sometimes. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Um, but it stems down to the frames that we're making,
Yeah.
oftentimes around language. And so it's a really, really neat science. Um,
Yeah, I had a little conversation with my friend about relationship anarchy last night. And he's like, isn't that label like a paradox in itself because you're trying to get away from labels and you're putting a label on something? And his approach was, shouldn't every relationship that you're in just be unique to the individuals involved? I'm like, well, yes, of course, but that's just not how the general population sees relationships, or typically will they are subconsciously, I mean, I'm only speaking from my personal experience, I have subconsciously walked into relationships thinking that it's supposed to be this way,
mhm.
when I wasn't taught that I could just create my own. Hello.
And so, yeah, that's relational framing. So, based
Okay.
on your history, what you have learned to attribute to the word date, you get an idea in your mind of what a date is going to be or what dating is going to be. Maybe get an idea based on the word relationship, what relationships should be or should look like. The more that you get exposed to, the larger the frame and the more flexible it is. So, people who stay in their own little bubbles, are going to have more concrete and rigid frames, and they're going to be harder to teach new things to.
Mm-hmm.
People who are expanding their frames, as the frame becomes more expanded, it becomes more and more flexible, and it's easier to add more information in. Um, and so we look at uh, things like people who have an internal, again, label of maybe a diagnosis. So, like, I'm HIV positive. And so, if, like, I have frames with my HIV that tie it to shame, guilt, fear, stigma, a lot of things that I definitely did have in my early 20s
Mm-hmm.
when I was first diagnosed.
I bet.
Um, but something that I started to recognize was the more that I perseverated on I have HIV, uh, the more that all of these like deep rooted things that had been kind of shaped into me about HIV were sinking in and taking hold. I kept seeing in my head myself looking like Tom Hanks in Philadelphia. I kept seeing like different scenes from movies. I remember this TV show I had seen when I was like 7 years old, and there was this episode where a character had AIDS, and like I kept thinking about like, I'm 22, and I'm like thinking back to this episode that I saw when I was 7, because it's the only way that I can make these relational frames and try and understand my experience. Um, and it wasn't until I started getting out there and meeting other positive adults who were living their lives, and who to them like HIV meant a different thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I got out there and I was like, oh, it's just different. Like,
Yeah.
it's just different. It's scary because it's different, but it's just different.
Right. It's
And
always going
so,
to be scary,
yep.
for sure. A lot of people fear this experience because of a lack of knowledge around it or lack of education around it, but it's not really something to be feared. It's just something different, and you're just going to have to approach it differently, learn new things, and yeah, that can be scary for everyone.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Change is always scary. And uh, do you mind if I move away from ABA for a moment and more onto the
not at
traditional
all.
therapy side? So, if you look at like Satir's stages of growth, so
Hmm.
you have your old status quo, and your old status quo might be something that you know is not good for you, but like you at least know what's expected in it. You've resigned yourself to it. It's not good for you, but at least you know about it. So
Right.
you have at least the comfort of familiarity. Um, then you have the introduction of a foreign stimulus, either new information, a new person, or a life changing event. For whatever reason, this introduction of foreign stimulus generates chaos. It interrupts the
Mm.
system. And so when chaos is there, you have a natural pull back towards the old status quo because chaos is uncomfortable and unpredictable. And at least
Mhm.
the old status quo, which might have sucked, is predictable. And we find comfort in that familiarity. So we have a draw back to homeostasis, going back to that old status quo. But in this period of chaos, if we can make it through the chaos, and this is where sometimes you need a therapist or a good friend or a solid community or just
Mhm.
some darn good resiliency skills. Um,
Mhm.
but if we can make it through that chaos, then on the other side of the chaos is growth. And then when you have growth, you achieve a new status quo and a new way of approaching things. And so
Mhm.
that's the stages of growth. And then the new status quo becomes the old status quo as a
Mhm.
new foreign stimulus gets brought in. Um,
Mhm.
so we're constantly given chances to grow or to remain the same. And it's uncomfortable to
Totally.
grow. So a lot of people choose to stay the same.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a bit of a wild card sometimes. I'll feel myself to be very stagnant, and when I get that feeling, I will make some I will cause chaos in my life to push myself. I'll put the pressure on, and people are like, "What are you doing? You're crazy. Why would you do that? Why would you, why would you tell your parents that, X, Y, and Z?" And I'm like, "Well, because I didn't really think it through. I just did it. And I am happy with where I am now. I'm more free and I feel liberated with where I am right now. And it's the same thing with approaching everything that's new. It's just like you fear it and then you realize that you're much stronger than you think. And you get through it and you're like, whoa, I'm
And
still
that's
alive. Like,
Yeah, I really think that you would like acceptance and commitment therapy, because that's
cool.
really what it comes down to. Acceptance and commitment therapy is all about willingness to face discomfort and
Hmm.
commit to actions that are going to better your life.
I love
Um,
that.
yeah, it's a really, and that's why they call it ACT instead of ACT, is because
Hmm.
at the heart of it, you're supposed to engage in committed action. You are supposed to
Hmm.
act, not
Right.
react.
Right.
And I really
You have to
love,
do it.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
The something throw out there as a resource.
mm,
ACT is a contextual behavioral science, and so it can be performed by people of any behavioral or mental health field. And like you're a student right now, Margot, you could actually join contextual behavior science for $13 for a year.
cool.
And it gives you access to videos, trainings, and protocols.
Sweet. Absolutely. I am a part of the SSSS and ASEC too. So, and I get their
Awesome.
journals and yeah, it's really
Oh,
cool just engaging in the extra education that's being offered my way.
SSSS has, I love the Journal of Sex Research. Oh my goodness.
Me too. It's my what's it called? It's my mouse pad. So it just
Oh,
sits
that's
right here
awesome.
every day. Yeah, I get to like peek in it. I read a journal every day or every week just to dive
Nice.
in more because yeah, my studies I'm in ABA psych, but I get to choose the research that I want to present to the class. So it's always sexuality centered,
Oh,
which is
yeah.
why I'm loving this online curriculum thing. Uh, so cool. I will definitely check those out. And speaking of resources, I know that you offer the in home parties, and
Oh,
essentially
yeah.
that's kind of a resource. I know that you're not doing it right now because of COVID, but For anyone who would be interested in learning more about sexuality and making it fun, can reach out to you. And I want to hear more, tell our listeners a little bit about that.
For sure. Okay, so I shamelessly call myself the sex analyst, and you can find me on Twitter there. So the Party with the Sex Analyst is a service that we offer at Empowered, and basically what we have are 24 options of topics to learn about. They could potentially, if I were to do this for a group of BCBAs, it could potentially make this worth CEUs. Never
Mm,
really thought about that. Just now having that aha
cool.
moment. Um, but people pick their topics. They pick 3 topics, and I'll speak for 45 to 50 minutes about each. If it was going to be CEUs, it would have to be 50 minutes.
Mm,
But talk about each of these topics, and in talking about the topics, bringing in like a little slideshow, but also the slideshow is not the emphasis. The emphasis is going to be on game related instruction, so that we can talk about this and like have a good time. And it's meant to be a party. So if, for instance, like let's say a person, housewife, decides she's going to have the girls over, they're going to party with the sex analyst. So up to 6 people can be there. I show up, and I've got my presentations ready, and then also baked goods.
mhm.
So they can choose if they want to have a penis cake, or if they want to have breasts cake, or a vulva cake. Bring out baked goods, and basically just play games, learn some new things, have some sexy little treats, and then
Mhm.
do some trivia and prizes at the end, so that it feels like a party. It's a
Yeah.
sex ed party, because too often what happens is, people want to have like a sexy kind of a party. Well, if they're not going to have like a play party where people are actually having sex, the other option that people go for are like these passion parties or pure romance parties. These companies come in and, sorry, I'm not, I'm going to dog them a little bit, but this is the reality. They're selling you, products from 5, 10 years ago, marked
Mhm.
up higher than new products in stores. And what you're
Mhm.
paying for is for a pyramid scheme. Um, and
Mhm.
so, you're spending $75 on a $40 vibrator. And people are getting really frustrated. Like, okay, so this is our party, is having somebody come in, and it's basically a Tupperware party with sex toys. Um,
Right.
and it's like, that's not really what people are wanting when they want to party. And
Yeah.
so the goal of this is not to sell you anything. Like, you pay in advance. I'm not here to sell you jack. I'm here
Yeah.
to teach you and to have a good time, and to get you to kind of apply this knowledge in gameplay and some fun with your friends. Give them sometimes people choose to have an hour of nothing but Q&A.
Yeah.
Ask any question you want to the sex
Right.
analyst, and that can be a fun thing as well.
Do you go in with like I mean, I'm sure there's a general plan that you follow, but if someone requested like, "Hey, we want to learn about BDSM," would
Oh
you
yeah.
cater to that? Yeah.
So just to give you an idea, some of the topics. So we have 50 Shades of Vanilla, for people who want to learn how to expand but still stay within the more vanilla side of things.
Okay, cool.
Um, but we also have puppy play, BDSM. We have fisting and water sports. We have, yeah, we have
Awesome.
polyamory. What else do we have? Um, uh, I know we have one on ABDL.
Cool.
Just a variety of different kinks and subsets. Um,
Yeah.
and really, again, if somebody was like, I want to learn about this, and I'm like, oh, that's a good idea, I'm going to add that to my offerings. I'm not going to
Yeah.
say no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, there's always more to learn, and I,
No.
I love learning too. So, yeah, if somebody's like, hey, I want to learn about pony play, and all I
Yeah.
have right now is puppy play, I can very easily put together some pony play stuff.
Uh-huh.
Um, So, if people want something different, they can ask, and I'll cater to that. Right now, it's been on hold because of the pandemic, and it really sucks because we were just kicking it off right before the pandemic.
Mm.
So we've got the idea, and like we got to do one party before the pandemic started.
Oh no.
Uh, so it's gonna work. We know it's gonna be fun, and we can't wait for the pandemic to be lifted so that I can start offering that service again. What I am looking at right now is what are the realities of potentially doing this more from a virtual standpoint. Is this
Hmm.
possible for me to kind of go national and have people have a party with their
Right.
friends, but have me on a screen, and then potentially like shipping out baked goods,
Yeah.
so that they have those, can still have the baked goods and still have the party element and all of that.
Yeah.
um, so
I would definitely sign up for that for sure. If you could go international or national, I would just be really, I don't know. I think everyone's getting more accustomed to this Zoom calls and all that good stuff that I think it would totally be acceptable, especially if you could just hook it up to the TV. You can have your little face right there and then your presentation going on. Um, I think that would be really cool, especially
yeah.
since there's not a lot of like quality education around kink either. So it would be
Well, and
really
I think
beneficial.
people are afraid to ask.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I wanted this as the party idea was like when you have, because I offered for the longest time, sexuality education for neurotypical adults at our center. And for 5 years, nobody took that service.
Wow.
Nobody in St. Louis who knew about the service opted for the service. So adults, neurotypical adults say, we do not need sex ed. But then they go into these sex stores, different
And they're
adult novelty
asking,
stores, and they're asking all of these freaking questions. Uh, so it's like,
like, you should be
eh,
paying me for this.
well, well, it comes more down to like, okay, what's going on here? And it's
Yeah.
stigma and it's shame, and it's the idea that like, if I go into a group, I don't know all of these people, and I don't know like how they're going to respond. But like, if it's you and your friends and you've knocked one back, you're going to be a lot more comfortable and a lot more
Mm-hmm.
open to asking these kinds of questions. And so that was a thing to note, was that this was not a behavior analytics service. It's not considered therapy.
Mm-hmm.
It's just fun sex education. And so it is one of those things where I said, I will never be under the influence, but like, it's a party. If you want to have a
Right.
drink or two, or you want to smoke your medical marijuana or whatever, you can do that. If somebody's belligerent or something like that, I'm going to leave. but uh, but I want people to feel like sex ed can be sexy, that it can be
Mm-hmm.
fun, that you can have fun with your friends around the taboo. It doesn't have to be a trip to the adult store and asking in secret. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even goat your friends on a little bit. Get your friends to ask that question that they've been asking you. you
Yeah.
know?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's something that has seriously lacked in education worldwide. Um,
That was actually my original business model. My first business model was to just do that.
yeah.
And then when I started getting into ABA and all of these other things, put that business model on the side burner. But then I was like, hey, I think I can
Yeah.
work this in.
Yeah.
And I've always wanted to do this. Sex education parties just sound
Yeah.
so much fun. But
Yeah.
something to note is that like my former business partner was she actually notified me of why we could not do this while she was at my company. Uh, so at the time, she was ASECT certified, and an ASECT certified sexuality educator cannot go do an in-home party, um, and cannot do any sort of like event like that where there could be alcohol or drugs or something
Oh,
like that present. So if you're doing education under like a certified sexuality educator title, then
right.
it has to be more formalized and more education. You can't be going and doing in-home
Right.
parties. So I can, because I'm not a certified sexuality educator with ASECT,
Yeah.
I'm on ASEX bylaws committee, but I'm not a certified sexuality educator with them. And I wouldn't be going out saying I am an ASEX certified sexuality
Right.
educator. I would just be saying I'm the sex analyst and this is a sex ed party.
Love it.
And so that's why I can do that. So that's something that I also, again, when she had exited, I recognized like, oh, wait a minute. That opportunity is now back up because Empowered is not currently ASECT affiliated, so we can do that for now.
Currently, are you working towards that?
I'm working towards becoming an ASECT certified sex therapist, but I still would not be
Uh-huh.
billing those parties as under certified sexuality educator, so I
Okay.
could still move forward that way. But I
Cool.
would never be doing in-home sex therapy because if I were
Right.
to do sex therapy, that would have to be virtual or in the office.
Right. Right. Okay. That makes sense. Um, okay. And any resources that you could offer for people looking to explore their hmm, interests in alternative relationships um, or kink related things, or even approaching alternative therapies? Like, how would someone even find you? You know?
Yeah. So believe it or not, you can actually, Psychology Today has a really good search feature. And you're allowed now to put that you're a kink affirming therapist in your Psychology Today profile. So now you can actually find kink affirming therapists there. If you're a sex worker or in the adult industry, Pineapple Support is a fantastic resource. They offer support groups virtual for people who are adult film stars, dancers, and different types of sex workers. Um, Other good resources. I think that something that people really should look at as a general resource, no matter what kind of practitioner you are, um, it's really wise to look at research from outside fields. And I
Mm-hmm.
just want to point that out. Like you're looking at Journal of Sex Research. Um, Journal of Sex Research is not something that the average behavior analyst thinks to pick up.
Mm-hmm.
But there are things in Journal of Sex Research that are very, very well done. The science is strong, the data is objective and quantifiable, and like you can take some of that research and put it into practice. So learning how to take outside research and put it into your own framework for your own license type or your own certified body's requirements, that's an important thing. Um, and for behavior analysts, something I want to throw out there is Schreck and Miller 2010, their article, How to Behave Ethically in a World of Fads, published in Behavior Interventions. Um, awesome article, great resource for how to take outside information and make it fit within the behavior analyst practice, because that's a tricky thing. And as
Mm-hmm.
somebody who's wearing two hats, a sex therapist and sexual behavior analyst, I've got to make absolutely sure that if I'm taking something from sex therapy, that I'm putting it through that framework and that it fits into
Absolutely.
ABA.
Yeah. So, and you offer telehealth services.
Mm-hmm.
So, someone, let's say, um, who was living out of state from you would be able to session with you or one of your employees. Um,
It
am I correct?
depends. It
Okay.
depends. So it depends on the licensing laws in their state or province,
Hmm.
and what falls under what. So if there is licensure that covers sex therapy in their province, then I cannot
Hmm.
provide it because I'm not licensed in their province.
Okay.
What I can do nationwide is consult. I can
Uh-huh.
offer consultations, and my couples or group consultations. Those are going to be limited. It's not
Right.
going to be long term therapy. It's going to be you guys do most of the work,
Hmm.
and then I meet with you and I just continue to give you a little bit of guidance as you take care. Your system learns to take care of itself, and so that's what I can offer outside of the state. But the main thing that I do outside of the state is train other professionals. I do a lot of consulting and supervising of other people's caseloads. So, like, if somebody was in Texas and wanted to work with me, if they have a licensed behavior analyst in Texas, or a licensed marriage and family therapist, or somebody who can work with them, I can be a supervisor, and I can actually like assist in that case. Um, but I'm not the one who's rendering the service, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. You have created a very dynamic practice and reach. Um, okay, and if someone, where can the listeners find you, like on your social media handles or website?
Oh yeah, thank you. So website is empoweredcenter.com. Our Facebook page is going to be facebook.com/empoweredcenterstl. And then my Twitter handle is, I'm going to spell it because my last name is obnoxious. Uh,
Mm.
so it's at uh, Itherian N, which which, if we were to spell that out, is AETHERIAN.
Okay.
And then a capital N at the end of that. So Itherian N, N for
Okay.
Nicholas. So yeah, uh, obnoxious Twitter handle. You can tell that it's me. It's a rainbow flag, and I'm probably the only person who's calling themselves the sex analyst. Probably, I don't know, but someday maybe I'll get that blue check mark, and then, like, you know.
Oh, I'm sure you will. That's awesome. Okay, well, I really enjoyed our chat today. I think we covered a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Yeah. Thank you for joining me at the PsycHoe podcast today. I hope that you enjoyed the talk. I want to remind everyone that I do these off of donations only, and you can donate at the Venmo, the PsycHoe podcast. You can also find upcoming episodes on Twitter and Facebook, as well as my website, the PsycHoe. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out via email or direct message on any of those social media platforms. Hope to see you guys next time.